So again, thanks for joining us and welcome to this Garage Talks. Uh, this is a new thing on the Discord server where we are trying to invite prominent people from the hobby to join us and join the people here in this community
Well,
to pick your brain about your games and design philosophies and whatever.
yep.
And yeah, we're trying to go for a not interview style, more just a hangout. We're having these a lot here. Um, so again, thanks. I'm
Sounds great.
very happy that you just that you wanted to join us here. Um,
Yeah.
I've been asking for questions from other people, and so we have a few, and
Okay.
one of the first thing is uh, Frostgrave was your first game written
Yeah.
for Osprey, but could you give us like a brief, your story in the hobby? I remember somewhere else that you're from America, right?
Yes.
Uh, and then moved to the UK.
Yep.
Um, so
So
yeah, please.
yeah. So I guess like most Americans, I started with role playing because role playing is a much bigger hobby in the U.S. than wargaming is. Um, and I can't. I've actually got conflicting memories about how I kind of first encountered gaming or fantasy gaming. Um, Either I found a copy of Dragon magazine or I found a copy of the D&D basic box set, and I can't remember which one came first anymore. But either way, as soon as I saw it, I had no idea what it was, but I knew it was for me. There's just dragons, monsters, guys with swords and armor. I knew I wanted to be a part of that, whatever it was. So I started to kind of muddle my way through it, and I guess I was about 8 or 9 at the time, and obviously, I couldn't understand the rules. My reading wasn't good enough, and my game concepts weren't good enough to really understand it. But it didn't matter because I could still understand, like, you rolled for stats, and those stats meant something, and you had a certain amount of gold, and that gold meant you could buy stuff. So I could still enjoy the game kind of piecemeal, doing the parts I did and just kind of making up the rest. And then when my father saw that I was really kind of getting into this, he did something that I now realize is quite extraordinary, which was he went out and he bought Middle Earth role playing, uh, the Lord of the Rings role playing game at the time, and he read the rules and he figured it out, and he became my first game master. And he continued to run games for me and my sister when she would play, and then as I grew up, he started to run it for me and some friends, and really continued to do that until I was about 14, at which point I could kind of take it over myself. I understood it now well enough, and he kind of, I don't think he was ever doing it because he loved it, so he kind of stepped back and let us take it from there. And from there, I just slowly started to expand into other role playing games and into other forms of gaming. And once you start getting into it, you start going to the gaming store and you see all this other stuff. And so as miniatures go, I first got into miniatures as kind of a subsidiary of these role playing games. To paint your character, to paint a couple orcs that you're going to fight during a scenario. Um, and slowly, I just kind of really got into the painting aspect of it because it was something you could do alone, uh, and something I just found I really enjoyed. And so I eventually collected enough of these that I could wargame with them as well, and started to find some wargaming rules because, like I said, wargaming was kind of a adjunct to role playing in the U.S. And then I went to university, and I basically lived in a gaming store for 4 years at university. I did manage to graduate, but my real education was at that gaming store, and at that gaming store, I played just every game that was out at the time. So every role playing game, every war game, um, and just really looking back, I guess that's where I really started to get deep into gaming and really understand gaming and to study rule sets and see which rule sets really appealed to me. Um,
How did you end up in the UK?
yeah, that's kind of a strange story. So after uni, I moved to Washington D.C. and I worked there for a while, and I really wasn't happy at all. Just with life, and I didn't like the way my life was going, and I thought I wanted to be a fiction writer, and so I was doing a lot of fiction writing, but it wasn't. I guess it was slowly getting somewhere, but not at the speed I wanted. So I decided that since I was unhappy, the only way I was likely to kind of change that was to make a major change in my life. And so I decided I would go back to university to study writing. And I thought, if I'm going to do that, why don't I do it in somewhere that's really kind of uh, inspirational and evocative? And being a fan of fantasy and especially kind of Tolkien fantasy, I thought I'll go to Britain. And I'd been to Britain once before after college on kind of a backpacking tour. And so I applied to a couple of universities, and I think the only one that actually responded to me was the University of Bangor, North Wales. And knowing almost nothing about the university other than a few pictures, I decided to go. And that proved a very interesting experience. The education experience was not great, as one probably should have realized from joining an English department at a university where English was not the primary language. Uh, but but it was really inspirational, and I did actually get a lot of writing done there, even if it wasn't necessarily for my course. I never finished the course, but I met a young woman there, and we ended up getting married. So after we got married, it was interesting because everyone just kind of kept asking, "So when are you moving back to the U.S.?" Like it was a given that if you know that we would have to move back to the U.S. But I actually really found that life in Britain suited me. It just felt a little more right in certain ways than life in the U.S. had. The pace of life in Britain is a little different. It's a little slower. Things are a bit calmer in general. Um, and I don't know. It just worked for me. So I never obviously my family's still in the U.S. and there's still things I love about the U.S. But I've really just kind of found that this is my home now. And so after we got married, my wife finished up university, so I was there for a year, just kind of hanging out, really. And then when she finished, we just kind of said, whoever gets a job first, we'll move there. And I ended up getting a job with Osprey Publishing, which actually connects right back to my earliest days of gaming because uh, a lot of those early MERP books, those Middle Earth role playing games, were illustrated by Angus McBride. Um, and Angus McBride, as a lot of people will know, was is probably the most famous illustrator of Osprey books of military history. And so I'd always loved Angus McBride, and I'd always been aware of Osprey, both as a military history fan, but also as a fan of his artwork. And so I can't remember exactly how I saw the job was offered there, but I applied and got the job, which was as a production assistant, which turned out to be a role I was incredibly ill suited for. But luckily, Osprey at the time was a small, amazing company that was really good at allowing people to do what they were best at. And so very quickly, well, not very quickly, but after a year and a half, I moved from production to marketing and kind of settled into marketing. I would stay there for 8 or 9 years and would really be a part of kind of gaming becoming a part of Osprey wargaming. So I was kind of right there at the beginning when they did Field of Glory, which was their first war game, and straight through to the creation of Osprey Games and all that is now.
Yeah, it's become
So
huge.
yeah,
I've actually, I've you're a superstar, published. Yeah, well, you have a lot of games published now, uh,
I do.
and yeah, we know who you
Well,
are. Um, so I'm super happy that you're here. And but
Thank you.
I wrote Phil because I couldn't really
Yeah,
find any podcast or that many interviews with him. So do you,
yeah,
hearing the entire story of Osprey Games and his involvement in that would be a cool story to hear. And
it would.
so
It would.
he's going to visit us at some point as well.
Oh, good,
Trying to
good.
so
So
that's going to be some interesting
yeah, he
gaming
actually
history.
he started probably about a year after I did, but he's even more central to that story of Osprey Games than I am. So, but I mean, we've been friends and colleagues now for 10 years or more. So, but it's good that you got him on. He's perhaps a little harder to get to show up for these things than me, but
Um, so now I have a huge pile of books here in front of me. Frostgrave and Ghost Archipelago,
yeah,
Rangers of Shadow Deep and Oathmark, and so and some of them are based on the same mechanics. But have you now, after a couple of games and the second edition of Frostgrave, um,
yeah.
do you have some kind of a game design checklist, or do you just go with the flow? Working on a new title or a new game. I mean, how's that process? If there's anything.
Yeah. So so Oathmark actually comes about very differently than the rest of my games. Frostgrave, Ghost Archipelago, I did as a freelance author for Osprey while working for Osprey. Um, Oathmark. So basically, 3 years ago, my family and I moved from Oxford to Kent. So I was saying that I've got to leave Osprey because I'm leaving Oxford, and we talked about it some, and eventually they ended up hiring me part time as a war games developer. And the first project and the main project I've done for that was Oathmark. So that was a game they wanted me to write specifically because they were working on this line of miniatures with North Star. So that one has a very different origin in that it was the request of someone else, whereas all the others have been things that, for whatever reason, I felt the need to write. Um, but saying that, I mean, they gave me a huge amount of freedom with Oathmark and let me kind of do most of what I wanted to do. And I do try in general to very much follow a kind of what am I really interested in writing now approach, because I find that not necessarily does that produce better work, but it produces the work easier.
Yeah.
To kind of go with what's hot in your imagination and in your brain, and that's not always possible because especially when working with a book publisher like Osprey, they have to schedule things 18 months in advance or more. So you got to tell them what you want to work at well before you actually end up necessarily having to do it. But you usually I've been kind of ahead enough that's worked out really well, and so yeah,
It was
it's not a checklist,
uh,
but go ahead.
so you mentioned that these 18th month in advance and a lot back and forth. There's a long schedule for releasing a new book.
Yeah.
I actually have a couple of questions about that.
Okay.
Was Oathbreakers and Oath Sworn were they switched around due to COVID or Battle Sworn
Not,
or the
they
or
were
Oath?
actually they were switched. So I wrote uh, Oathbreakers first, and they ended up getting switched because Osprey and North Star realized they wouldn't be able to put out any undead sets at in that time schedule. So Oathbreakers has the new rules for undead, and they really wanted to at least one box of undead to be available when that book came out, and it became apparent that that was not going to be the case. So they asked me to switch the two books, and by that point, both of the books were essentially done. Um,
Okay, so no kind of stress or you know.
Well, it was in the sense that so I did have to change a few things. Like I had to go through both books and reword a lot of things. So like so the idea of military expeditions first appeared in Oathbreakers and then reappeared in I'm now forgetting the names of them,
Battle Sworn.
but in Battlesworn, yeah. So then I had to go back and introduce it in Battlesworn and have it reappear in Oathbreakers and a few things like that. The only the only kind of issue with it was I would have preferred so apart from undead, Oathbreakers also includes rules for kind of for legendary heroes, which are heroes you kind of track from game to game, and whereas Oathbreaker has the same kind of idea for units, um, but the one for individual heroes is more developed than the ones for units, and I would have rather that appeared first, but it's not a huge deal, and in a few months they'll both be out, and people can get them both, so it won't really matter. But it just it's a bit odd to have things released to the public not in the kind of order you intended to show it to people, even if it's not necessarily a huge deal in the way the game is played. But
I don't know if it's the right word, but um, is this hero progression? Is it more
no.
developed or deeper? I thought that the idea I had from reading like the what is Battle Sworn about,
Yeah.
I thought there was going to be a lot more focus on these legendary units.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's fairly simple. You get this was a
Yeah,
reroll, and you can lose that. So, and I was thinking more like typical campaign. This unit gets this special rule, this special rule, this special rule, and
right,
gets wounded, so you get this debuff, and you get that like you have with all your characters always. Well, do I
right,
want to keep this elite guy missing a finger and an eye? Um,
right. So it's a little more like that with the units. I mean, it's not obviously going to be to the same level of like Rangers or something like that, but yeah, the individuals will pick up uh, essentially special. They're more like kind of heroic actions in Rangers. They're kind of one use abilities. So, but they can have as they go up in experience, they can have multiple ones of these kind of one use abilities, and they can get wounded and die and things like that. It's still a what I would consider a relatively simple system, um, just because in a game of Oathmark, you have a lot more things already to keep track of than you do in, say, Frostgrave or Rangers. So I don't want too much of it going on. And I say in both books that I suggest you only play with one legendary hero and one legendary unit, but I do want it to be simple enough that actually, if you wanted to play with a couple of those, that's all right. And it's not going to be overwhelmingly complicated to keep track of. But in truth, with Battlesworn, part of it may have been just bad blurb writing, which is my fault.
what
In
what's
truth,
what's blood
so,
writing?
sorry. So like so when I tell Osprey 18 months in advance, this is the book I want to write. Part of what I write is the blurb, and the blurb traditionally is what appears on the back of the book. But it's in this case, it's what I write for Osprey to say. Here's my quick summary of the book, and you know that's what you think it's going to be before you write it, and then you go through the writing process, and it's not always quite the same thing by the time you're finished. And if you're smart and you remember to do it, you then update the blurb and make sure that on their system it's you know the blurb fits with the book that you wrote, and usually it does, and usually it's pretty close, but occasionally an emphasis can shift somewhat in there, and you end up kind of overemphasizing one aspect of the book versus another. And that may be what happened there. I can't actually remember, but it didn't, in some ways, didn't end up becoming quite what perhaps I originally envisioned it as. Although I can't remember what I originally envisioned it as. So
And uh, talking about what's been envisioned, I've been thinking about with so Oathmark didn't get uh, the release that was planned with
right.
the game show
No, it sure
tour and
didn't.
all that, and COVID messing it up. So how, if you have any feel about how has Oathmark been doing with
Um,
release, and how you did you have any thoughts about? I mean, it's not a competitive game. You don't really write those, but about how did you think that Oathmark would be doing in the
no,
tournament scene and stuff, and how it's living?
yeah. Um, I think unfortunately there's no way of getting around the fact that it was hurt pretty badly by COVID. Um, it literally came out in the first couple of weeks of lockdown in Britain, and it was supposed to launch at Salute, which got wiped away, and I was supposed to go to Adepticon, which got wiped away, and I was supposed to go to Northern Ireland, hang out with the BC War guys, and that didn't happen, and it you ended up with a weird staggered release because it released in Europe before it released in the US by a month, and and all kinds of bad things like that. And you can never say, oh, the game would have done twice as good if that hadn't happened. You don't know that. It may have done exactly the same, but my gut says that, yeah, actually it was really kind of wounded by that. And not only by the fact that the kind of all that marketing got shot down, but by the fact that for a lot of this time people haven't been able to sit down and play a game with someone else. And
Yeah,
it's while there is a lot we can do in this hobby that we can do solo, you need to play games some at some point in order to drive your own kind of desire and interest, in continuing. And I think that's been really lacking for Oathmark.
it,
For Frostgrave and for Rangers. Well, Rangers being a solo game, so obviously it hasn't hurt that in the same way. But even Frostgrave, it already had kind of some online things people could do, and it's a little easier, I think. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't think Osprey is, you know, disappointed in the grand sense of how Oathmark has gone. But obviously, I don't think it hit their initial expectations either. Although in their revised expectations, I think it's probably done fine.
all right.
But you know, games, I guess, for a game to be successful in a big sense, it's got to hit a certain critical mass of players. It's got to hit that point where it's the players themselves that are kind of creating the marketing and creating the drive, and the players can't get out and do that. In the UK, that's all about people playing it in clubs, and there are no clubs, or at least very few, active right at the moment that people can play in. So we shall see. Like I said, I don't think anybody's saying that this has been an utter disaster. I think there's plenty of people that seem to be having fun with the game, and it's sold decently well. So, but only time will tell if that's it or if it's going to carry on to bigger and better things.
But seeing as it's a mass battle game in a sort of a skirmish saturated marketplace, if you will,
Yeah.
may, perhaps there'll be some sort of resurgence. I mean, I'm currently painting up my Oathmark army,
Right.
and it has taken me at least since the start of COVID to get this far, and I'm barely scraping up to 1,000 points.
Right.
So well, and so that might happen, the sort
Yeah.
of a second wave where people have finished up their armies and can actually, and then we can get out and play with those armies. But there's also another thing that I was kind of wondering, why a mass battle game all of a sudden? I mean, there's yeah, we've seen Frostgrave and a lot of skirmish games over the
Mhm.
years, but not really many mass battle games. I mean, the only one I can remember being a big one was Kings of War, and
Yeah,
that sort of came out of the tail end of Warhammer Fantasy. So, do you have any ideas or comments about sort of how
yeah.
and why?
I mean, I I agree that there's a question of is mass battle gaming, does it hold the same kind of place in the wargaming world that it once did, as skirmish games have risen and kind of come to dominate the industry. Is that because there weren't many options for mass battle gaming, or is that because that's the main thing that the industry wants? And uh, there's a bit of a chicken and egg there. If you don't create the games, people can't play them, and they can't become the big thing. But
Sure.
so I don't know. And like I said, it wasn't this one wasn't driven by me in the sense that I didn't say I really want to write a mass battle fantasy game. And in fact, when they first asked me to do it, I was quite unsure if I could do it.
Mm, yeah.
Because at that point I'd written a couple of skirmish games, and skirmish games are what I have played most in my life. I played plenty of mass battle games, but they're not the ones I was usually drawn to. Partly because I've never been able to paint a full army, but I'm one of those lots of enthusiasm and one unit in and done.
Yep.
I,
Yep.
I must have started a Skaven army about 7 times because God, they look great on the field, and then you paint one unit and you realize I got 18 more of these. I need that was only 20 points, but
Yeah,
so,
that's why I made an orc army and not a
yeah,
goblin army.
that's why once I get down to doing my hardcore Oathmark army, it's all elves, just because they're expensive and I won't have to make many of them. So, but
So
but
now that we're on
yeah,
Oathmark, um, so Oathbreakers is going to bring out undead and rules for undead, um, and then these legendary heroes. But we also know because Amazon is great at breaking news of games and titles
yes, they are.
that are only planned to be, you know, told about in a year or so. Bane of Kings. What's the blurb?
Yes, I can't remember.
Well,
um, it's the the life of an author is kind of a weird one time wise because people are always asking you about things kind of at a different point to where you're thinking about them. So I finished work on Bane of Kings 4 or 5 months ago.
oh, so it's done. All right,
It's
so
done.
never mind
Well,
the blurb then. What's Bane of Kings about? If
it's
you
done as far as the words being written are concerned. Um, and I'm trying to remember what it is about um, because I kind of wrote. I've written Oathmark as this kind of one continuous rolling thing. To my point of view, it's hard for me to remember what's specifically in one book and what's in another. And I'm trying to remember what all is in there. Uh, and I'm not doing a very good job. There is, I do remember that one of the things I kind of wanted to play with was the idea that Oathmark is set in this kind of dark age, and there were empires before that. We never really go into what they were because I try to keep it very open, but I liked the idea of um, kind of that these empires created these kind of guardians that could be like colossi, the Colossus of Rhodes kind of thing, or they could just be statues. So there's kind of some new troop types that are, I guess, they're similar to constructs in Frostgrave in that they're kind of living statues, but there's kind of levels of them. So you can have the giant ones that smash around, and then there's the smaller ones that are more like troops, but they play very differently because they're not subject to morale in some of the same ways. So they use some of the same rules that the undead will, but they also have some rules that are peculiar and particular to them, and then there's a whole set of scenarios based on that. So um, not only can you have them in your army, but they kind of there's some scenarios where they can kind of become active and kind of maraud around during the game, squashing people, and so that's one thing. That's not kind of the Bane of Kings is a little more of a kind of collection of things as opposed to having a central idea like Undead is for Oathbreakers. There's a couple of things. There are some rules for uh, putting units in slightly different formations.
So
So
skirmishes.
yes, so that yeah, you can actually take actual skirmishers, or well, you basically, um, if you have certain territory, you can modify your archers into being skirmishers, or you can modify your spearmen into being a phalanx, or there's a few others. But so yeah, so the idea there was to allow you to play differently with units you already have. To not just continuously make you buy new units, literally buy new figures to play differently with your army. I wanted to kind of give a few more options for trying out different techniques and things. So
What
so that's one of the things
what
down
kind
there.
of undead are we going to be seeing? Uh,
Um, so the undead are kind of divided into two. I mean, I can't remember how many units there are. Probably, you know, a dozen or more. But two kind of main breakdowns in that you've got skeletons, which are your kind of traditional junky undead fighters, and then you've got revenants, which are more like they're more high quality, so they're more kind of Army of the Dead and Lord of the Rings kind of. These are actually serious, scary troops, and you've got in both of those cases, you've got your skeleton spearmen and you got your skeleton archers, and you've got your revenant warriors and you got your revenant line breakers, and then you've got your specialist units. So you've got some wraiths, which are monsters and quite terrifying, and the big one that uh, people apparently have really been wanting is chariots. So there are rules for chariots. They're just for the undead here, although we're gonna. Oh no, wait, is that true? No, sorry. Yeah, sorry. That's something else that appears in Bane of Kings. So uh, in Oathbreakers, you get rules for chariots for the undead, and then you'll get rules for chariots for everyone in Bane of Kings. It's kind of once I'd gotten the rules worked out for undead, I figured out how I could, you know, give those to everybody. Narratively, the idea is that the undead come kind of crashing in to the marches with their chariots, which is a technology that isn't really used in the marches anymore. But once, obviously, people see wheeled death machines, they got to get some of that in their army. So everybody figures out how to do it. Um,
and
so
that actually is a nice bridge to one of the questions that Aestus
okay.
Aska has been asking. Is what's uh, what degree of importance do you think that you as a game designer and tester have uh, regarding Math Hammer or power gamers and power gaming? I mean, do you have any responsibility there in your games, or
Yeah.
or is it enough to just write, well, this is not a competitive game, so
No. I think no. The game designer always has some responsibility for every rule that's written. Um, but the players also need to be aware that war games are horrendously complex beasts, and no matter how much you play test or no matter how many people you get to read a work, you know it's basically impossible to try out every combination of a complex game. Uh, things there are things that will just never come up in playtesting, uh, and partly that's because of the philosophy of the designer and the philosophy of the playtesters. It's just I didn't think to play games that way, and I think it does depend on the game. So I feel more responsibility in that sense for Oathmark than perhaps I do for the skirmishy games. Um,
Do
but I
you?
also recognize that I fail, you know, and it's not a fun. I mean, I've been meaning to write an article about this somewhere, but probably the literal worst part of my job is writing errata, because every line of an errata I write is basically like an admission of failure. You know, here's something I got wrong. Here's something I messed up, uh, and that's no fun. Luckily, of the people who play my game and who are drawn to the kind of games I create, I think are more willing to work with a game and accept a few flaws than some types of gamers and some certain type of games are. But you know, it's one of the reasons I wanted to write second edition of Frostgrave, is because I wanted to try and fix mistakes, especially mistakes in the balance of a campaign that I had made in the first edition. But
So,
you know, go ahead.
um, yeah, do you play your own games when they're done?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I don't. In truth, I don't play a lot of games at the moment. Well, at the moment, nobody plays a lot of games. I tend to only play games these days at events. That's partly just because I don't have like a gaming group around here. I'm sure if I did have a gaming group around here, then I would play, and I would, in general, rather play my own games because I wrote these games to be the kind of game I want to play. It's not. I'm not saying my game is better than other games on the market. I'm just saying this one was literally designed for me. This is the kind of game I like. Um, so
Do you play with your wife? Is she a geek at all?
no,
No.
I've played Frostgrave with her once because she wanted to see what it was all about, and she said that was nice, and that was it.
All right.
She is not a gamer. She's she is a fantasy fan, so we can watch Lord of the Rings together and such, but she's not a gamer. Not in the she likes a good family game, which actually I tend to hate because I can't play Pluto or Monopoly and not think about how you could change all the mechanics to make this game massively better.
Oh,
But
Ludo with campaign rules. Uh,
exactly, yeah.
Tom, do you have any other Oathmark questions? Or
Yeah,
would geek-
actually, a small one, but I don't think that Joe can actually answer this one.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, okay, well, it's because sitting here painting some knolls up, the
Yeah,
Frostgrave knolls, up for Oathmark, and just and then having to count them as orcs. I
right.
don't mind. I don't really. It's fine by me.
Yeah, yeah.
But why the? I'm guessing it's sort of a production issue, and then therefore not something you might be able to answer. Why not include more staples from the fantasy pantheon, if you will? I mean, like gnolls or uh, well, ideas fail me now, but like the gnolls I'm
Yeah,
painting right now,
um,
because I
yeah.
mean you have these really cool Eastern European influenced monsters that I for the
Mhm.
life of me can't remember the name of and don't have the book nearby. But you have those, but not a gnoll, not a unicorn, not
Kobolds?
yeah, kobolds. Thank you. So can you sort of talk about that, or is it more something we should ask Phil from Osprey about?
Um, it's probably more. I mean, there's part of it is a kind of the the ownership issue is slightly convoluted. So because the gnolls are Frostgrave figures, and I own the rights to Frostgrave, even as most of those rights are licensed to Osprey. Um, that's very different than the Oathmark figures, which are owned. I mean, the Frostgrave figures are owned by Osprey and North Star, but they have to license the right to call them Frostgrave figures from me, whereas Oathmark figures are completely owned by them. Um, and while that doesn't necessarily preclude kind of including gnolls in Oathmark, it kind of makes it messy, and I think that's one of the reasons why specifically they've avoided gnolls. More to the point, I think, you know, Osprey and North Star want eventually to have produced all the figures that appear in Oathmark, you know, to have so that they can sell any figure you want from Oathmark. The problem is that I can write stats a lot faster than they can manufacture figures.
Of course, yeah.
So you know, as was the case with the undead, you know, like even writing that book, it's like, whoa, you're already, you know, running way ahead of what we can do, and so there's always a tension there between, you know, yes, we'd love to put out figures and we'd love to put out new races, but you know, we can only put out so many figures a year, and we don't want to fall farther and farther behind.
Hey there, can I jump on that? Can I ask, what race would you like to create? Or what cities from the multiverse would you combine in your Oathmark army with no restriction?
That's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that because because I come from a very kind of Tolkien-esque fantasy background. You know, I really wanted to do the kind of core races, the orcs, the dwarves, and the elves, and I wasn't at first kind of hugely thinking beyond those terms. And because they've kind of told me not to go crazy with it, kind of toned it down. I will say that somewhere there do exist rules for halflings, um, and Osprey has those, and I don't know what exactly they intend to do with them, but they do exist, and they're not very good. But you know, well, I mean, hopefully the rules are good, but the stats on the halflings are not terribly good. But
That must be one of the most
if I was,
asked questions at all.
it really is, which is quite strange to me because like I've never personally really wanted to war game with hobbits. I don't know. You know, I actually own the Lord of the Rings Shire book where it gives you loads of scenarios for fighting with hobbits because it's just kind of fun to read. But I don't really have the desire to fight that out. But a lot of people apparently do. So, and maybe that's just because you know you've got some good models out there. You've got the new War Games Atlantic ones just came out, and you got a couple of really nice ranges. So in the driven by miniatures, I get that. You know, I'd probably I would probably bring in some kind of lizard man. I just really like the cold blooded idea of them. I think that could be really fun to play with. I think it's something that never. I don't. Boy, I'd have to really think about how you do that because I'd love to have an army that actually was dependent upon the weather. You know, like, oh, it's too cold, all our stats are going down. Whereas, oh, it's a nice hot sunny day, let's kill something. So I think that would be really fun to play with, although it may infuriate players. I don't know. That's one of those things where I have the struggle between the hey, this would be a lot of fun, and boy, is that not balanced at all. Why would I do that? So, but that might make a better magazine article, perhaps, than an actual official supplement.
But then also to be fair, in regards to our earlier discussion about balance, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
since you can mix and match any race and therefore any profile in the game. Um, there must also be some, as you said, there's an upper limit to what it can be tested. So, and in my case, for instance, I'm just using the orc profile. I mean, the,
Yeah.
so to your credit, I will say that the profiles presented in the Oathmark book is
Yeah.
are very versatile. So you could just, well, gnolls, they're kind of brutish, they're kind of strong, but maybe not so brave. Oh, orc, perfect fit. Here we go. So
Yep.
was that also sort of a consideration
Right.
when you were writing the profiles for the various races included?
Yeah. I'm a huge kind of proxy guy. That's that's I think that's how you get started as a war game designer. Actually, is you just take other people's war games and you play around with them and you change things. And when I got to write my own, I still thought in those terms, and that's why I do try to not over define anything in a way. And yeah, for people who've played Oathmark and played around with it, you start to see that you only have to make very subtle changes in the stats to actually have a huge impact on how that unit behaves on the table. Um, so yeah, you don't need to change something much to make something new, um, and or you don't need to change it at all, really, with the gnolls and the orcs. I did ponder gnolls for a while, and they even in my head they were based on the orc stats. I did change them very slightly, but now I can't remember how because I didn't write it down. So,
Okay.
but,
Yeah.
Right.
yeah,
Well,
I mean, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, just thinking about balance, I mean, it is, the great thing about Oathmark is that because the great thing for me anyway is because any army can include any unit, there was no need to balance armies versus each other. So, it doesn't necessarily matter whether elves are better or worse than dwarves. It only matters are elf spearmen balanced to their points, you know. And I'm not saying I got that 100% right. I'm sure I didn't because point values by their very nature are not, it's not possible to get them 100% correct. But it was a lot easier, I think, actually, to balance units versus each other than it was to balance armies. And I honestly have no idea how uh, the Games Workshop goes about. Well, back when they were doing Warhammer Fantasy, I don't know how they kind of really balanced the elf army versus the dwarf army since they used such different rules, or at least potentially could use such different rules. I should
Well,
really talk to Alessio sometime about that. Rick.
yeah.
will we be
I
getting
think,
orcs? Miniatures?
Yeah.
Cool. Um,
but that sort of concludes my
Okay.
questions for Oathmark
Yeah.
at
Sorry,
the very least.
I don't know when. I do. I think orcs are kind of in the queue as one of the closer sets. But again, better to ask Phil. I'm only kind of tangentially involved. Yeah.
all right.
North Star and Osprey are great, and that they do keep me involved in all of these discussions. But I tried, to be honest, not to be that involved in them
So
for a
yeah,
couple of reasons. But
I'm really looking forward to playing Oathmark. I've finished painting over 1,000 points, and COVID permitting, I'll be playing in a month. So
yeah.
really looking forward to trying it out. Um, but so Frostgrave, second edition, you know,
Uh-huh.
the breakthrough. That's it must have been impacted by COVID as well, and shows and such. But uh, has it been the release you want?
Yeah.
Um,
Um, I don't think it was hit. Well, it was hit in a different way. So it it didn't need the same level of marketing, say a new game does, because you've already got this core of players who, you know, they knew they were going to buy it when it came out. So it was, and you knew that those people were going to talk about it and you know, discuss it in the forums and, you know, put it on their blog and stuff like that. So you knew there was inherently some marketing kind of machine that was just going to happen regardless. What it did impact, and it did impact it some, because yeah, you know, it could have released at UK Games Expo or somewhere, but that didn't happen. But the bigger thing was that in an ideal world, in a non-COVID world, you would have seen a big North Star, you know, what they call Nick Starter.
Yeah.
You'd have seen probably a lot more miniatures coming out at the same time. So you would have seen, you know, a lot of. I mean, you got the one plastic box set, which is great, and but you probably would have had a lot of metal to go with that, a lot of new wizards, a lot of monsters and stuff like that, and it just couldn't happen because, you know, just because North Star had to, you know, send a lot of its employees home and for long periods of time, and just couldn't keep up with the casting and the shipping and the admin that goes with having all these figures created. So and that hurt it, because, you know, nothing advertises a game better really than new miniatures. You know, it's the miniatures that really suck us all in to this hobby, and they're the best advertising for it. But at the same time, I can't complain. It seems to have gone down quite well. The sales have been really good. You know, at a time when sales for a lot of things, I'm sure, are not really good.
So obviously, there hasn't been as many Frostgrave Second Edition games played as in a non-COVID world. But you know, one of the big goals was spell balance after thousands and thousands of games of First Edition. It's been a while since Second Edition released. Have you gotten any feedback? Have you achieved, now that it's out there with the player? And speaking of balance, is it achieved, or have you been made aware of the new elemental bolt, the leap?
Nothing. To be honest, I think not enough games have been played for that question to be answered. But nothing has immediately come across as, you know, oh my goodness, I got that wrong. Like, I must admit, like the week it came out, and this was true of Oathmark too, and maybe even more Oathmark than Frostgrave too, are not fun weeks for me, which is a shame, because in some ways it should be. I'll let, you know, hooray, my new game's out and people are engaging with it and enjoying it, but it's very hard as a creator not to take every question as a criticism. And I know it's not a criticism, it's people actually enjoying and being interested in the game. But, you know, when people say, well, what if you do this, this, and this, and it's like, oh gosh, what if they do that, that, and that, did I get it wrong? And, you know, panicking a little bit, and partly, and that hasn't been helped by just, it's been a really anxious year for a lot of reasons. So probably I'm wound a little tighter than I normally am. But you know, after a week or two, that all settles down and people just start playing the game and having fun with it. And you realize a lot of these questions are kind of theoretical, not practical anyway. You know, I think the only thing, there's nothing really so far that's come up that I thought I got that wrong in Second Edition. Probably the closest thing is you can use Create Potion to generate a little more money than probably I actually wanted people to be able to do, but that's such a minor thing in the grand scheme that I'm not going to worry about it. So, you know, I'd much rather that happen than somebody figured out how to throw a +10 elemental bolt. So we'll see. You know, nothing's war games. War games are living entities, or they're dead. You know, because as people are playing them, there's always going to be situations that arise that just have never come up before because of terrain or because there's 80 spells in Frostgrave, and
Yeah,
it's impossible in playtesting to fully understand how all 80 of those can be used in combination, and that's what was great about having 5 years of people playing the game, so that I could witness
it's really
this
good.
kind of mass playtest. And luckily I didn't get anything so wrong that it broke the game, but
Oh,
and I think, go ahead. Oh, did you
uh,
find one? What?
no, 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 no. It's one of the, regarding changes to second edition.
Yeah.
So after digging your blog, and I was pointed toward this by a fellow gamer. This is going to sound, like very journalist like. So back in April
Mhm.
2016, okay, so 4 years ago, you wrote on your blog that you would have liked a
Okay.
different XP system
Right.
for the spells. That instead of giving 10 XP
Yeah.
per spell, you wanted to give 25 XP for each different spell. And
Yeah.
now with the Maze of Melkor, and we have the 300 XP cap, maximum 3 levels. But how come in second edition, if you've given it any thought at all, are we
Um.
still at the
Well,
10 XP
I
per
have.
spell?
Yeah, I haven't. I didn't, as far as kind of second edition is concerned. I did think about that a lot at one point, and I basically just came down to, while I think that's better for the experience part of the game, I think it's worse for the record keeping part of the game. Um,
Gotcha.
and I went back and forth and eventually decided, actually, keeping the record keeping low is more important than the way the experience points are gained here. As most people are going to find, I think, is, if you have a good game, you're probably going to max out your experience points anyway.
Yeah, we did playing Thor of the Lich Lords with the Maze of Melkor.
Right.
Then after that came out, uh, we were around 250, 300 XP always.
Right.
Uh,
So in some ways, it doesn't matter hugely how you get those XP. It matters. It matters if you have a bad game, and the kind of 10 for everything as opposed to 25 for each actually tends to help in the bad game, uh, which is where you need the help. It's a very minor thing, but
what
and probably less than record keeping, but
what's your favorite school of magic?
um, illusionist. Not not because I think it's the best by any degree, but because I think it's the furthest from what's done in any other war game. Um, I don't the kind of the spells that an illusionist has are not things that are generally replicated in other war games. It really gives you a different way to play than than say you could in Wartime or other skirmish games. So I find it interesting. I think it's a lot more challenging, say, than the Elementalists, or I've probably played an Enchanter more than anything else. Um,
Yeah, I'm gonna
Partly
play
because I don't.
Thaumaturge. Is it called? I don't know how
Yeah,
to pronounce what.
Thaumaturge.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah.
play one of those
So
here in second edition.
yeah,
Um,
I mean, I tend to, because I tend to play at shows most often. I tend to play non-aggressive schools of Magic because I never quite feel right as the game designer going in and absolutely just blasting somebody during a game. So I want to play something that's a little less aggressive, so that I'm not kind of. It's not the time to be offensive. But
it was news to
and
me
then
that.
there's
Oh,
that way.
sorry. Uh,
Go ahead.
it was news to me that North Star, with the license and the Frostgrave being
Yeah.
licensed from you. How about that the terrain from
The yeah. So
bits
that
called, well, I can't
from
remember. They're
Cromlech.
called bits of war, but what are the terrain?
Cromlech is
Yeah,
the
Cromlech.
company. Yeah. So yeah, so
Tabletop
basically they have
Simix.
to license it from me and Osprey, essentially.
Any idea how it's been doing? I mean, they're a great kit and they're pretty
Yeah, yeah.
reasonably priced.
In truth, no idea at all.
All right.
Because all of that stuff's reported to Osprey, and eventually some of that will make its way to me, but it's not something I guess I could ask.
I'm gonna put it on my list for questions for Phil here.
Okay. He may not know either,
Ah,
because that'll be he may, but that's more handled by the licensing department
but
in terms of kind of the money end of it, the sales end of it.
it's fun to
So
see, terrain done specifically for the scenarios, but it's no secret there's been a lot of ruined terrain released over the last couple of years, and a lot of it has been painted with snow instead
yeah,
of glowing green uh, meteor shards from
yeah,
Sarissa and TT Combat and you know
yeah. And I did wonder when they first approached about the license. Part of me was like, are you guys really going to be able to make anything that's significantly different from what these other people are doing?
it's
And
it's official.
yeah, well, I mean, yes, obviously that is a difference, but I think they've also like it. Their kits seem to be a lot more intricate than a lot of what's on the market. It's why you can get the kind of just ruined corners from them. They have very specifically done. You know,
Yeah, the
exactly. They
scenarios.
even came back to me several times saying, describe this more to us, and I was like, I don't know, because while on one level I do describe exactly what you need, on another level I don't describe exactly what it is or looks like, because I don't want to over define it if you want to make it yourself. But of course, if they're doing the official one, then they got to know exactly what it's supposed to look like.
I,
There's a
I
little bit of back and forth
I
there.
really like the update in editing for this second edition book. Requirements at the top of each scenario. What you need for the
Mm-hmm.
scenarios. I mean,
Okay.
that's a good thing to
You can.
add, because before you had to search a wall of text often to pick out terrain pieces and monsters in the
Right.
scenarios. That's a
You
nice upgrade.
you can thank Ash Parker for that. Actually, he
I
that was
will.
his suggestion, and yeah, it hadn't occurred to me. So that's an
So
end user problem. I don't have to worry about that. But yeah,
uh,
I see the appeal to it.
so Red King. That's the only Frostgrave expansion I've been able to find a name on, despite having access to Amazon and the next 1.5 years of releases.
Yeah.
What's it going to be about? I mean, we know demons, but
Okay.
do I have
Yep.
to melt my
So
board?
you do kind of. No, actually, but what you do strangely need is a big ball of string. Um, so so the idea behind the Red King is that back when the Cataclysm wiped out Felstad, there was a group of wizards who saw it coming an instant before it happened, and the only way they could figure out to save themselves was to make a deal with this really powerful demonic entity called the Red King. And the deal was that basically they sold out the city, um, but not for 1,000 years. So now the 1,000 years has passed, and though the cities are ruined, the Red King's kind of come to claim, because he's kind of trapped in this pocket dimension, and so his idea is to kind of merge his reality with that of Frostgrave, and which is all kind of really high concept. But what it means practically is that I wanted to see how I could warp reality in terms of a wargaming board, which yeah would lead one to worry that you need to melt your board and go all, Salvador Dali on it. But the challenge for me and the interesting thing for me was, okay, how can I make that work practically? And the way it tends to work practically is by laying lines across the table in different ways. And so you lay the string across the table, and I use that in a lot of different ways. So it could be that reality works one way on this side of the string and that way on the other side of the string, or the string represents this wall of change that is moving across the table, or um,
Full
and
10 scenario campaign?
yep, is it 10? I think it's 10. It might be 12. It's either 10 or 12 scenarios.
Do we get to kill the Red
And
King?
not exactly. You you need to, in the end, you basically have to, and you literally have to sever his connection to Frostgrave. And the only way you can do that by the end is to enter his dimension and kind of destroy the tethers that are holding these dimensions together. Because by that point, Frostgrave is just getting crushed down to this little point. So the Red King, you never actually encounter the Red King. He's too great of a kind of entity. He doesn't really have a physical form in any sense, but obviously you find a lot of his different minions, his herald and his gatekeeper kind of people, and lots of his demonic servants that are causing all kinds of problems. So
But
it's kind of like Thaw of the Lich Lord, and you've got this big, kind of ongoing campaign leading up to bigger and bigger things. But I think it's even more. The narrative's tighter. It really is much more like this is what's happening, and you are getting drawn along into it, whether you like it or not, because all of Frostgrave, and there's about halfway through the campaign, there comes a point where you can literally no longer escape from Frostgrave. There is no way out. So
he's a demon stronger than the ones in Forgotten Pacts that I still have to kill. The big two-headed boar, and I can't remember the snake.
um, yeah, no,
Ambernax.
Ambernax and
Something.
or something.
Yeah, you wrote an impossible name.
Yes, I did. Well, they're demons. They're supposed to have impossible.
Tisserane.
But that's why he goes by the Red King, because you couldn't pronounce his real name. I didn't even bother to come up with it. But most of the demons you're going to face here are more like demonic soldiers. They're kind of tough soldiers, but they're not demons in the kind of Ambernax sense. They don't have huge, wandery special rules, and that's because, in general, the scenarios themselves have such kind of odd special rules. You don't also need to be trying to remember what this weird creature does at the same time. So I wanted to focus on the scenarios over the creatures. In most cases, there are a couple of big baddies, and there's also a couple of my personal favorites that return for this book. So give people a chance, if they actually had figures, to reuse them. So
yeah, we don't do that. We just paint new ones.
I know.
Yeah.
I think that's really what my job is. I'm just an enabler. I just write rules to give you guys the excuse to buy the figures.
So
my books are.
you mentioned earlier, and that's interesting, and kind of into a question that we've prepared. So a war game is either living by the community and the content that people create, or it's dead. So Frostgrave, obviously alive. Second edition, the rulebook just out. Art book coming, and at least another expansion. We know there's more stuff coming for Oathmark, so you're not out of a job there. But so Ghost Archipelago.
Yeah.
Core book, 3 expansions. I love it. Great setting. Dead?
Yep. Unknown. Hibernating. The problem with Ghost Archipelago is that it doesn't sell well compared to Frostgrave. Is essentially what it comes down to. it never has. Probably because I guess because it's partly because it competes with Frostgrave on one level. You can only play one or the other at any given time, and I think people kind of viewed it as an expansion to Frostgrave, even though it is a standalone game because it's got the Frostgrave name and the rules. Um, but I still really love it, and in some ways, I enjoy the setting more than Frostgrave, um, and so I still I am still doing things for it. I just wrote a solo scenario for it that's going to appear in War Games Illustrated uh, in a month or two, um, and I'm doing still doing stuff in Spellcaster for it. So in my mind, it's not dead. I'm actually painting up a new warband for it. I've got 9 of them. I'm waiting on Reaper to get this one more figure in stock so I can get the last one, but it just doesn't happen. So, but it's the Warden, so I can't. It's just really not finished without it. But
Yeah,
so it's not a dead game
no,
to
I
me,
want
but it
I
is
want to play
certainly
it
kind of.
more as well, and I want to play through the expansions. Um, but as far as Osprey is concerned, there's no more stuff planned at the moment, right?
There's not. There is not.
Um,
And I
s-
could, yeah, but
s-
and I said that's mostly a kind of monetary thing,
how does
and
that make you feel about Stargrave? I mean, there's a lot of sci-fi games out there. There's a lot of sci-fi skirmish games. There's a lot of
yeah,
small space pirate warband games out there already,
yep,
and you're releasing a yeah, I've read it, but
another
so
one.
and I haven't, but
um,
do you have any kinds of core book 3 expansions doesn't sell well enough, was living too much on the Frostgrave name, do you have any fears?
I not really. I mean, yeah, in the sense that if nobody buys it, that's going to be a real bad day for me. But hmm,
So you have the opportunity to sell. Well, they probably sold 10 books anyways, but we need to get some hype now because Frostgrave 2 is out. So we need to know something about Stargrave now. Breaking news.
I do worry. Like, I mean, in truth, one of the reasons that Ghost Ark really doesn't have any new stuff is there is a limit to how much I can produce. And I've got essentially 4 games out now, and Stargrave coming, and I can't really continue to write a lot of material for 5 games. It's just not possible. So something at any given time is going to have to, take a back seat or be done. And it may come to pass that Stargrave pushes out one of these other games because it's so successful, or it may be a game that does the core book and an expansion or two, and then is done. And um, while obviously I'd love everything I write to become the greatest selling war game of all time, and everything be considered pure gold, that's not going to happen. And the market's going to move on, and players are going to move on, and I'm going to move on because I'm going to want to write other things. So you know,
But can you tell us something about Stargrave? I mean, so far we have a name, right?
yeah,
I don't think you've written or said anything official. I haven't stumbled across anything.
no,
Uh,
I've purposely avoided saying a whole lot in truth, partly um, because Frostgrave 2 was coming out, and I wanted the attention to focus on that. And I needed my attention to be on that, and because the playtest process was ongoing until very recently. So I hate talking about rules while they could still potentially change. I've already gotten in problems with that with Frostgrave 2 because I think I said in a podcast somewhere that the bear was a specialist soldier, and actually I ended up changing that before the book came out, and it's caused confusion. So I try to be very careful about that now. And
So
so,
without talking rules and still being in
okay,
playtest and stuff like that,
yeah,
what to the people listening in here, uh, what's the main difference between Frostgrave and Stargrave? Because one of
okay,
the uh, what's it going to be about, uh, things that pops up most is, so it's going to be like Jedi because it's about mages or heritors. It's going to be some kind of magic or
yeah,
magic
yeah,
ability wrapped in
okay,
lasers.
yeah. I mean,
That's the anticipation.
the it sounds flippant, but the biggest difference really between Frostgrave and Stargrave is guns. And what I mean by that is in Stargrave, everybody can shoot. Everybody's carrying a gun. And this changes the way a game plays incredibly. Um, you know, Cover that was really important in Frostgrave becomes even more important in Stargrave. And it is very important to figure out ways to make the game still flow and move and not just become tied down into a firefight. And
Shooting is more
uh,
important than close combat in Stargrave.
absolutely. One nice thing you get because it uses the same mechanics is that this actually in in Frostgrave fight is by far kind of the key mechanic, the key stat for for all you guys except your wizard really, and even your wizard to some extent because it's both your hand-to-hand combat ability, but also your dodging ability against shooting. Whereas in Stargrave, shooting is so much more important that you get a better balance because shooting is your ability to shoot at someone, where fight actually is more often going to be used as your ability to dodge incoming fire. Um, so that actually brings a little bit of nice balance to the game. In terms of one of the ways it's different is let me think. it so you still have all right, let me step back here. So people say it's going to be like Jedi. Well, the answer to that question is yes, if you want it to be. You can create characters that are kind of like a Jedi, and it can be space wizardry if that's what you want, but it doesn't have to be. These are options. You can also create, a kind of Boba Fett character if you want, or just your tough grizzled soldier. So you do have a central character. So you have a captain, as he's called, and you have a first mate. But the relationship between those two is not the same as the wizard and apprentice. The first mate is an independent character from the captain, and he can be completely different from the captain.
Hereto
So instead
Warden.
of yes, except that you could kind of switch the two if you wanted, so that you could have your warden be your bigger, more powerful character, and your Heritor be your smaller character if you wanted. So the game has backgrounds, and so you one of those backgrounds is the soldier, and one of those is the mystic, and one of those is the cyborg, and this gives you access or easier access to certain powers, and it's perfectly fine for your captain to be a cyborg and your first mate to be a mystic, so that their power set could be completely different from one another. You can also have both cyborgs if you want, and their powers could overlap. The choice is yours, and so there's actually a lot more freedom in constructing kind of a crew how you want it, and there's a more difference in feel between the different characters than there is in Frostgrave. Not necessarily mechanically, because you know in Frostgrave everybody has kind of a different spell set or can, but in feel, in that everybody's a wizard in Frostgrave. In Stargrave, you can be a wizard, but it's just as possible that you have no wizard and that everything your gang focuses on is close combat or is shooting with guns or what have you. Um,
With now
so
that we have backgrounds
yeah,
in the game, does it take us more in an RPG direction than say Frostgrave, where leveling up that's more spells, where Rangers is more like an RPG. There are
yeah,
more different things.
a little bit. It's probably it is more so than Frostgrave, but doesn't make it all the way to Rangers per se. Um, Partly because as much as I love RPGs and try to kind of push wargaming in that direction at an opportunity, there's only so far you can go that way if your main thrust of the game is competitive. Um,
Is
and the main Stargrave is mainly competitive, although the first supplement is going to have some solo material in
so
it.
s-
Um,
of course it's still being a D20 game, um,
yes.
but is it going to be static? I mean, Ghost Archipelago, you have the Heriter with his hero moves,
Yep.
and only a few shooters. And second edition Frostgrave even more so because all the bows are specialists. But if everybody's a shooter, will we get a static game? I mean, find
Yeah.
some heavy
Yeah.
cover, make sure you don't roll your dice as a
Well, I mean,
stormtrooper, and kill the other people.
essentially, it can't be a static game because you are still uh, going after loot. It works a little differently than say Treasure does in Frostgrave, but the point is, you have to move and you have to get this stuff because that is the point of the game. And if you just stand there and shoot, nobody's going to get it. You're going to lose, or it's not going to be worth your time. So there is an element of you've got to move and you've got to go get this stuff. And obviously, different backgrounds will have different ways and means of going about that. Um, some of them can manipulate this stuff from a distance. Others will have to physically run up and get it. Um, it it does mean I think you're going to think about your moves more than you do in Frostgrave because you're you're going to have to think about how people can shoot at you from all angles that they're standing. But yeah, I mean, you have an objective that's sitting in the middle of the board more or less, and if you just stand back and shoot, it isn't going to work. The other guy's going to probably take some casualties, but he's going to get away with the goods. So you're going to have to go after him because there is also most of the scenarios have a limiting factor in in time sense, not in the sense of this game is played to 10 turns, but in that your groups are small fries in a big galaxy and you've got to move fast and get out of there, or people that you really don't want paying attention to you are going to start paying attention. So
Is that a part of the game?
yeah, so basically it's called the Ravage Galaxy, and part of that reason is because there's these giant, basically all your central authorities falling apart, and there's these giant pirate fleets floating around that rule everything more or less, and you're always trying to stay one step ahead of them. And the longer you stay in one place having a gunfight, the more unwanted attention you're going to attract. So you gotta
Are
you
there
gotta act.
expansions planned for Stargrave?
There are so there's one that I'm nearly done with, and another proposal that Osprey's asked me for that I'm working on. Um,
Are we getting a
so
plastic kit?
yes.
Yes, I was so disappointed. I was not disappointed in Reality's Edge. The game is awesome, but
Yeah.
I really wanted to see a sci-fi cyberpunk plastic sprue like the Frostgrave
Right.
soldiers. for that. That's gonna be
Yep.
awesome.
So
Um,
it'll be another Bobby Jackson
how many
design.
different kind of NPC models do you need for a standard game of Stargrave? I mean, do we need to make an 80 model bestiary as Costa Capelgo and Frostgrave?
Uh, Not quite that big. Um, no, the best area is smaller, but it's still there, and you're still going to need some. Um, for one thing, you're going to need a chunk of pirates essentially, and I use that term very loosely. These are just armed soldiers essentially, but so you'll need some of them, and then there are you know some of the scenarios call for specific alien models. It's a bit tougher. I found it a bit tougher doing aliens because, at least in the early days of Frostgrave, most of your monsters were based on either common fantasy tropes or commonly available figures. Um, Whereas when you're doing aliens, that doesn't exist in quite the same way. And, uh, you know, a little bit wary of creating too many bespoke creatures that aren't going to be easy for people to
Yeah, there are
get
10,000
familiar
different
with.
alien models from board games out there, so making them more, it makes sense to make them more,
But none of them
broad.
look like what I've
Oh
described.
yeah,
But yeah,
exactly. So
yeah.
is the pirate fleets, that tension, is it a part of the game? I mean, you get to Frostgrave ends when all the treasures are off the
Yeah.
board. Will we
Yeah.
see more and more pirates?
So I've put it in as an optional rule just because you probably don't want to use it the first few times you play. But there is a rule called unwanted attention, which basically is as the game progresses, you roll at the end of each turn, adding the number of the turn, and the higher you roll, the more chance, and the more chance pirates show up, and the worse off they are in the sense that there's more of them or they're better troops and stuff. So as the scenario continues, your chance of these guys showing up increases, and the chance of them sending their better troops or whatever increases. So so yeah, again, it's encouraging you to finish your business and get out of there because essentially once they start coming, they're not going to stop coming if you're still there. So
Um,
like I said, it is an optional rule, but I think it's one A people will use because it's fun, but also it does help encourage the kind of let's keep this game moving.
so we have Patrick Todorov, who is in the chat. There's a podcast garage text chat going where people are dropping some of the questions that I'm reading, and he just wrote that he put one of that a similar idea in one of his games,
Mhm.
like oh well,
Okay.
and we were talking to him recently that uh,
Yeah.
it's hard not. I don't. How do you feel about that? I mean, if you want to make, it's almost impossible to make something completely original in this day
Yeah.
and age with so many games. How do you feel that
Yeah.
if
I
you're
mean,
writing a rule and you see another rule set and sort, oh man, I just thought that I had this idea.
when everything that anybody writes is going to be built upon what's gone before, you know. And I've talked about this when talking about writing rules. Like, why is it that in most war games, skirmish war games, a, a miniature can move 6 inches, or the common range of a gun is 24 inches? And that's because A, that's how it was in Rogue Trader, and B, because it just feels right on the table sizes that we tend to play on. And, you don't change this because it works. And um, if you write a war game and your intent is, I'm going to have every rule be new and original, I guarantee you almost nobody's going to play it because nobody wants to pick up a book and see nothing but rules they're going to have to try to learn and figure out. There's only so much kind of capacity you have for taking in new and original each time. And
My
so as a
mind
game designer, you
my mind
go
was
ahead.
unable to get over the fact that Games Workshop made the Lord of the Rings games in centimeters when they first brought it out.
I don't take a lot of flack, but I do get a lot of questions like, why do you do it in inches all the time? And that's literally just because I come from America and we measure everything in inches. So my brain works in inches. And I would literally have to stop and think every time I wrote something to convert it into centimeters. And,
What's
you
uh
know,
what's
why
the
be bothered?
unique
But
selling point of Stargrave? I mean, if a product or a game needs a chance to survive long term,
mhm,
it should have a unique selling point.
yeah.
Uh, what is Stargrave going to offer us?
Well, so I think it does bring a more role playing feel than most of the. I'm gonna have to say most because obviously I don't know every skirmish sci-fi game on the market, and some of my rules are going to overlap with other people's, but I do think you know it's got a very heavy campaign system, probably slightly even more than Frostgrave does, because like I said, you've got both the captain and the first mate who kind of level up independently of each other, and the whole thing is designed to push a narrative feel to the game, and I'll get into this even more in supplements, but and I think if you combine that with what is a system essentially that people already like with the Frostgrave system with the D20 and it's kind of fast, wild resolution. So I think you're getting a fast, wild, campaign-driven game um, in a very heavy narrative style, and I don't know that all of those elements have been brought together in that way. And you're also getting the what is the equivalent of the spell system. So it's they're called powers in Stargrave, and even that's not a great name for them because of the wide variety of different things it covers. But it means you've always got these choices each turn when you're activating your key characters. Do I shoot or do I use one of these special abilities? And that decision making is a big part of how the game plays out. Um,
Are we getting a spaceship like our ship and base?
Uh, yeah, for the moment, it is just literally more like the base.
Okay,
I've toyed with ways of bringing that more in. Again, it's something that if I go more down a solo or cooperative route with Stargrave eventually, I would like to explore more. It doesn't work well in a competitive sense because
gotcha.
either you're stopping to play a completely different game essentially by having spaceships battle or
It's a huge
um,
improvement to the balance, considering that Frostgrave is about warband against warband. That the inn has been changed in second edition, and the crew quarters in Ghost Archipelago was so
yeah.
insanely expensive because it
Yeah,
that was the one of the biggest breakers of balance is that extra
yeah,
warband member. Um,
yeah, which it's one of those things that as I designed Frostgrave that I just didn't fully understand. I didn't realize how big one extra guy was.
yeah, it's huge,
Because
huge.
yeah, it is huge. It is absolutely huge, and that's why most of you, well, not most, but a lot of your changes to second edition are with that in mind. There's the big one being that there's basically no way to not have 10 guys in your warband anymore, you know, unless you're just doing it for fun. You will always have 10 because
Yeah,
to
thugs and
start a game with
thieves are
8
free.
is crippling. So,
You're pretty good. I think you're good at doing world building with few
Mhm.
words. You're making open worlds. I mean, Frostgrave is it's huge. You know the description. You can
Right.
put anything in this broken magical city, and there's snow and ice. But few words of fluff uh, to flesh out the world pretty good. Same goes
Hmm.
for Ghost Archipelago.
Yep.
Uh, how do you do that with a game like Stargrave? And I don't know how far you are in the art department, because when I think sci-fi, there's a lot of different styles. I mean, Star Wars, that's one that it's a distinctive look, as is a Star Trek or
Hmm.
Starship Troopers. I'm reading a lot of
Right.
sci-fi right now, but they're all very distinct.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where are you
They are.
in your
It's
words building the Stargrave world, and if you can spoil anything about that, the art direction right now?
okay. It is harder. There's no doubt because for one thing, you're not creating a world. You're creating a galaxy, and so obviously, like scenery wise, literally anything can exist because you can go to any planet you can imagine and do that. So even more than kind of Frostgrave, you're operating on this kind of macro level when you're talking about fluff. And I've always been one who kind of created the universe through the pieces of the game. So instead of like having large text blocks on this is what the universe is like, it's more about like this is the soldier background. Soldiers, blah, 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 blah. And you get that kind of little glimpse of the galaxy through the description of the soldier. And then you'll get another little glimpse of the galaxy through the description of the mystic and through the, psionicist or the robot expert or whatever. And that way, like, it's, I guess with all my games, Ghost Archipelago a little less. I actually felt freer to define that setting a little bit more for whatever reason. But I kind of like giving the player a puzzle without all the pieces in it. Um, so you've got a lot of pieces, but because they don't all connect to each other directly, it leaves you all this room to imagine it in a lot of different ways. So while I don't think you can't pick up Stargrave and see Star Trek in it because Star Trek is a very, at least kind of classical Star Trek, is a more kind of utopian setting, and this just literally isn't. Um, but you could easily pick it up and I hope see Star Wars or Firefly or Aliens. So it's what is there is a grittier um, the grittier end of sci-fi. Things nothing's gleaming. The floors aren't carpeted. You're walking on metal decking and the wiring is exposed in places and things like that.
Are we going to play
And you're
all
gonna
over
get
the place? You know,
yes. And this is one of those challenging things again. Like so, there's 10 scenarios in the book, and all of them are set on different planets. So and this of course is impossible for most people because you don't have a desert board and a underground mine board and a jungle board and I hope people aren't too put off by that because
we will have.
the specific setting is not hugely important in the sense that what's important is the specific things I tell you to set up in a scenario. So if you need a house, you will need a house right in the middle. And it doesn't really matter if that house is surrounded by lots of jagged rocks or lots of trees, but so if you only have say jungle terrain, you can convert all these scenarios to be set on jungle worlds. That's fine. But as it's part of the world building for me. I wanted to show like all the different possibilities of the universe by setting all of these scenarios in different places.
Gotcha. Well, I'm really looking forward to
'Cause
Stargrave. There's nothing better than getting a new book and planning tons of new models and terrain.
yeah, you know, and I do. Sometimes I worry about, do I put out too much stuff? You know, like I know as a gamer, you can only
Well,
game so much, you know, and there's only so many games you can play. But
yeah,
also I think,
we've been
you
talking a
know,
lot about that here in the channel. What's the essence of our hobby? I have
mhm,
10,000 games. I almost buy every single Osprey publication, and I just enjoy good
right?
rules and working on a good project and working on terrain pieces. And I only play a couple of times every year.
Yeah.
Um, I don't have a club. I don't play every week. Solo gaming is changing that a bit. I'm trying to get
Mhm.
into it, but it's nice building stuff for a book. I can't bring out too much stuff.
Yeah.
Um, do
that's
you?
that's kind of where I look at my own shelf and like I've got all these role playing game books and I don't role play, you know, anymore anyway. But it doesn't matter because I enjoy reading the books.
Yeah, books are
Yeah.
cool.
So, and
Do,
yeah, it gives me ideas.
do you want to make a fully fleshed out setting? I mean, we are getting closer to it with the ranges of Shadow Deep. Now we are across the wastes that just
Yeah.
started, taking it to a desert part of the world. Um, so that world is getting more fleshed out,
Yeah.
but not fully. Um,
Yeah. You know, I think part of this also goes back to kind of this idea of world building. Um, you know, when when kind of Tolkien put out Lord of the Rings and very soon after Herbert put out Dune, it really changed the way people viewed science fiction and fantasy because those two works both present these incredibly intricate worlds with background and history and I respect that hugely, but as a creator I was always actually more drawn to settings, or not settings, but I really liked the way, say, Robert E. Howard created Conan or Fritz Lieber created Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, where you had these characters and the world existed for these characters. And so you didn't know anything about the world outside of what was important for the story that was being told. And slowly in this way a world got built around them. And I thought and as for me as a creator, that's a much more attractive way to create a world, partly because it means I can present pieces to you guys and to anyone as I'm doing it, as opposed to, you know, Tolkien
ha-
locking himself away for 40 years
yeah,
to
so
create
everything
the
you
epic.
have to write further has to fit in whatever you boundaries you set for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Why limit myself at the beginning when I don't know which way I'm gonna go, you know? And in some ways that can be helpful. Like I did, I did write half a page or whatever on what the world or what the country of Alador looks like and what surrounds it. And I didn't go into great detail, but I think had I not said there's a big desert to the north, I would have written across the waste because it just may not have occurred to me. But so it can be helpful to have some cues for yourself, but at the same time, if I had defined really greatly what that desert waste looked like or what was in it, I might have not felt the same freedom to kind of write the adventure I wrote in it. Um,
Do you have any
so
plans after? So Across the Wastes is gonna be a trilogy, right? And the first one is out.
yeah, so
What after this? Where are we going in
um,
Ranges of Shadow Deep?
I got to finish the trilogy first. I started writing the second one, and I got about halfway through it, and I really didn't like it. So I actually ended up binning the whole thing, which is kind of hard to say, but it's true. And I'm going to start it again, and I hope I'm going to end up with something a lot better, and I can present something a lot better than I had before to you guys. But at the same time, I feel quite guilty for kind of leaving these rangers hanging out in the desert. But so I'm in that sense, I'm probably going to be careful in the future about how I do that, and probably not present things piecemeal like that for that reason. But I I've
That's
got a lot of ideas for Rangers, and I don't know which one is going to take precedence. So
that that
this one
game is
is
alive. That is so cool. I mean, that Facebook group for Rangers. I don't think
it
I've
is a
seen
great
another. I
group.
mean, more than any of your other systems, the amount of
Yeah.
fan-made material, and they all come with the same, style of front cover. Uh, it's crazy. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Cthulhu mythos,
Well, I think that's one
World War II. There's so much stuff going on.
yeah, that one shocked me. I must admit, but I think that's one of the joys of solo gaming is you since you're not beholden to anybody, you can just let your creativity run. And I
But
also think during this time when you know a lot of our other games are locked down, essentially, it's to be honest, it's probably helped Rangers as people looked for solo gaming material. But
yeah, it felt
once you kind of get into it,
the the deluxe rulebook wasn't too old either when we got locked down.
no, it wasn't. It actually came out in February, so it kind of, I guess, hit at the right time in that
Yeah,
sense.
all things considered,
So
I'm really enjoying Rangers as an RPG game. It's
yeah, I mean, I think it's my effort to play an RPG in some ways. I, I've been really fascinated by the idea of solo role playing, and but I've never been overly taken with anybody else's take on it because I think they're starting with the idea of an RPG, whereas actually I started with the idea of a war game. Actually, war gaming works better solo because you have pieces on a table as opposed to role playing, which is theater of the mind, and solo theater of the mind is basically, you know, fiction writing. So,
you have a lot of game systems out there now. Uh,
yep.
Frostgrave, Oathmark, Rangers, uh, and I guess they're taking a lot of your time. Having so much stuff that is already ordered by Osprey.
Uh-huh.
Um, how about Blaster and that setting? I know Joseph McGuire. I
Yeah.
mean he has a playtest group on Facebook, and it
Mm-hmm.
happens surprisingly often that he writes. I saw an episode of a TV series. I got an idea for a game. Here's the game, and there's like 20, 30 pages of a new game. Do you have anything? Uh, do you have anything in the skull there that's like new? Something boiling?
Yeah. Uh, I I do. I always do. It's one of the ways I think I realized that I should probably be doing this and not writing fiction. Is fiction I actually really struggled always to kind of come up with plot ideas and story ideas, whereas writing games it's just like I can't stop it. It just won't. Sometimes it's overwhelming, and I've realized I can't write it all. There's just too much. So I've actually got I haven't quite figured out what to call it, a mini game. I want to call it a mini game, but of course, it's already a miniatures game, so it's a mini miniatures game. But but this idea for a very kind of fixed war game, which I'll talk about if you guys promise not to hold me to any timetable whatsoever, because I literally have no idea
On
run
behalf
all over
of
the
everybody here, we promise.
Okay. So I've got this little game that I'm calling Death Ship One, and the idea of it is that you take a squad of soldiers pulled out of time, and you get to choose. You can either take kind of uh, pre-gunpowder era soldiers, or gunpowder era soldiers, or futuristic soldiers, and you get a different number of soldiers based on the tech levels. Obviously, you get more of the older tech and fewer of the future tech, and you're basically dumped into this alien death trap. And the whole game is essentially you have this squad, and you have to try to fight through 5 rooms of this alien death trap, and you have no idea why, um, but these aliens want to see you fight, and they want to see if you can survive. And if you make it through all 5 rooms, you survive. But actually, you're probably not going to. It's a game designed for you to most of the time lose. It's a solo game. So yeah, you pick your squad, you roll a random room. There's a few different types of aliens that appear in these rooms for you to shoot at, and random traps and stuff happen, and there's a lot of carnage, and that's the entire game. But I think it.
The pitch seems to fit the title of Blaster Magazine,
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to
but
put
it
that
might
in
be
there.
too big.
I have a feeling it'll be too long, and well, I'll probably just self-publish it as a separate little thing. But yeah, I mean that's just kind of one of the things that got into my head, and I couldn't get it out without starting to write it. Um, and some of the rules, I pulled some of the rules from Operation Last Train. Um, another little game that we haven't talked about, but because it's a solo rules, you know, Starship Troopers kind of thing. But I needed a little more granularity than that game has. But
You gotten around to any
anyway,
mechanics on that? Something
yeah,
completely new?
I've written all of the rules. I just haven't written all of the rooms. So it's really the problem is if I write a room, then I got to play test it. Like it's harder to play test than it is to write because it means I have to clear off the dining room table and set it all up and then get it all cleared out before the kids come home from school. So
Yeah, I've moved my bed outside, so I could get a room.
yeah,
Um,
that's a good idea.
so uh, Mark is just mentioning Last Train. I can't
Yeah,
remember when you put it out, but I've seen it
me
mentioned a
neither.
couple of times actually in this server. Um, have any idea? Has it been doing good? Is
Well,
it
it
it was a charity game?
yeah. I mean, I put it up with a request for a charitable donation, and I was hoping to raise £1,000 or dollars. I can't remember which one it's in now, but and I did, and I haven't really thought about it a huge amount since then. And every so often, I get a little note saying someone's donated £5 or $5 or whatever
That's
it is
cool.
to the to save the children through this. So
How about
I,
your model auctions recently? Also, a great idea. I put in some bits, but they went for, I mean, they went for good money. The warbands,
I
or
almost
more than
told
you
you that.
or did you
Yeah,
expect? What
yeah.
did you
So
expect doing that?
I didn't expect anything with that, to be honest. I like literally was just cleaning stuff out, and I used to sell off a lot of miniature soldiers um, before I became a war games designer, just because I had so many and I didn't know what to do with them, and I live in a small house, and I don't really do that anymore. But I still get into this situation of having too many minis because I paint minis all the time and don't have anywhere to store them. So yeah, I guess somebody mentioned the idea to me of selling them off, um, and it occurred to me because these miniatures had some kind of background to them. So there were a couple of Frostgrave ones that were some of the first ones done, and they were resin masters, and they were like a couple of the first Frostgrave figures I've painted. which I guess I can see why that's cool to some people, but I wasn't sentimental about them in that I've since created what I consider my go-to Frostgrave warband that I like to play with. So these guys were just never going to get used. And the same with Rangers. So I had the kind of Rangers that I used to play test the game originally, but I've since, painted up. Really took my time and painted what I wanted to be my Ranger warband. So these guys just didn't really quite have a place in my life anymore. But I thought, you know what, some people might really enjoy having pieces that share in the history of the game. And then, I don't know. I didn't feel like I needed to make money off that aspect of gaming. So yeah, I just put them up for charity and was really shocked by the the amount people were interested in them. So I'll have to be a little more thinking about that next time I have a little bit of a clear out. So.
It's cool history, and we put some good words to the posts.
Yeah.
Having the original Frostgrave warband that will be pretty cool. So yeah, that was good.
I think for charity, people are a little more willing to bid a little higher, perhaps, than they would normally.
I'm just gonna ask if there's any of the listeners here that has any more questions. I've covered all the stuff that I'd written down.
I do have one actually, and it was in regards to all this this narrative focus that you have. And I remember that when Fall of the Lich Lord came out, I was quite surprised to find that it was a story played in miniature form, because I haven't really seen that before or since. Actually, I'm not really aware of anybody else doing it in a story arc mode as you're doing with that with most of some of your supplements. Where did that come from? Is that sort of the prototyping for Rangers, or?
I think it's literally because I grew up a role player, and my first use of miniatures was as pieces for a role playing game, and I've never fully been convinced that there's a hardcore line between the two. And so I always wanted to just play role-playing games with lots more miniatures figures. And so I've always kind of tried to push miniature gaming that way, whereas people who come from a pure board gaming background perhaps just don't think in those terms. And it's quite tricky because, like, the problem with the literature and the problem with all of these, and that I have as a writer, is this idea that why do the same two warbands keep showing up in the same spot to fight over the same treasure? And I know that's probably a problem that only exists in my head. It doesn't exist in the players' heads, but it irks me a little bit. But I've been working with that and trying to kind of find new ways around that. So with like the Red King, like I said, there is a literal narrative drive that's forcing you to kind of show up in the same places at the same time. But yeah, I love stories, and for me, miniature gaming is just another way of creating and telling a story. I'm not, as is well known, I don't write competitive games as such, or I don't write tournament games because I'm not interested in playing games to win. I try to win, but that's not why I'm at the table. I'm at the table to see what happens and to see what story develops. And the more I can add to that, the more fun I have, because that story is going to stick with me longer than whether I technically won or lost. And in most of my games, there isn't even really. I first wrote Frostgrave and submitted it, And one of the things that Phil came back to me with was, you realize there's no victory condition in this game at all. And I did, and I was like, oh, so that in first edition there's this, there's this one little box that says you win if you get more treasure tokens, but like it's in some ways I don't even believe in that box. Like if you must have a victory condition, here it is. But if you must have a victory condition, you're probably not really playing the game as I designed it. It's really designed for you to decide for yourself whether you won or lost that encounter.
Yeah, and I can see the
Without-
sort of it's there's a line drawn from these Frostgrave stories and then the whole narrative experience over to Oathmark, which, as you may guess, is sort of my jam here. How come? Why do you think that there's more of an interest in narrative approach to games now? If you have any ideas or sort of if you can scry a bit into the whims of the market.
I don't know. I mean, well, I think if you read a lot of psychology, I don't read a lot of psychology, but if you read psychology, it's become increasingly clear that human beings understand the world and perceive the world through stories. Facts are actually much less important than a good story. There's something about human beings that are designed to want to put things in narrative. And I think gaming is slowly cottoned onto that. And it's the reason why, if you take something like 40K, it's actually become much more narrative driven over the years, and it seems to be actually getting even more narrative driven now. They're actually writing campaign books that are really telling a campaign and pushing the whole story forward in a way that they've never really done before, and that's because if you can get people into the story, they want to follow it through. And as a company or as a creator, if you can hook people into that story, it's much easier to sell them the next part. People who've played Across the Waste are much more likely to buy the next Ranger supplement because it continues the story than they would if I just wrote another random scenario, even as I've said I'm probably not going to do that again. So I think, and that's, in some ways I hate talking about that because that sounds like the kind of dark underbelly of the whole thing, like we'll suck them in by getting them involved in the story. But and obviously it can be used that way, but also it's about, I hope, increasing your guys' enjoyment of it, because it just makes you, it makes you part of it, in a way that
Well, I can totally see that. Yeah, because the reason why I'm so interested. I mean, I started out with Warm Offensive as many others did, and been jumping around system to system. And the most recent one was Kings of War, and not to badmouth other games, but to me, it was I found out that while I enjoyed the system, I didn't really care for it. It made no. There was nothing. It was just numbers, sequences, and dice rolls. And then I've tried others, but Oathmark sort of hit that, to me, the really sweet spot of there's just enough randomness and chaos and story and opportunities, but also deliver sort of a satisfying tactical experience. And I guess, and to me, so even though, yes, it is a bit of the shady underbelly that, oh, I want to see what happens next, I think there's definitely merit there. I mean, also, maybe it's just, to me, a bit of a counter reaction to all of this focus on the tournament scene, the meta, as you will. For the longest time, I mean, you've been in the hobby for quite some time as well as I have, and the last 20 years or so, I mean, ETC has always been sort of the benchmark for anything hobby related for many years. The big Warhammer tournament,
Right.
And maybe this is just a counterculture to that, as a sort of a reactionary movement. I don't know. It's just, but I've just found it interesting, really. That I'm seeing it more and more now. The
Yeah.
narrative focus. Um,
Yeah. I was at Adepticon 2 or 3 years ago now, and I was just walking through the hall, and I was walking past where they're having this massive 40K tournament, and suddenly the wall above my head exploded with dice, and dice were raining down on me, and I had no idea what was going on. But what had actually happened was one of the guys had actually thrown his dice against a wall because a roll had gone against him. And I just, after I kind of recovered from the shock of being bombarded by dice, uh, it just got me thinking, like, that guy is having no fun. Like, why did he come to this show, knowing that that could be a potential outcome for what he's doing? You know, I never want to go and have that. I mean, you're never in full control of, what your opponent's going to do or something like that. But I want to go somewhere where I know I'm going to have fun playing a game, win or lose. I never want to be so caught up in the winning that I'm going to get angry and throw something if it goes against me. I want to, you know, ideally I want to laugh when things go wrong, which is why I wrote Frostgrave. But even with something like Oathmark, I want to be like thinking, oh, crud, my left flank is collapsed. What can I do? And not worry about it too much. But it's interesting, like comparing it to Kings of War. I've never actually played Kings of War, though. I've read the rules. And one of the things that I really wanted to do when, in fact, the one thing I said to him when I started Oathmark is, I've got to have individual casualty removal. That is just absolutely crucial to me, because if I'm not getting to remove figures from the table, I'm not playing a war game. Guys aren't dying; they've got to die, or it's just a lot of pushing and shoving.
yeah.
I've got to see units ground down and taking casualties, because that's the story for me. Like, oh, we've lost half our men.
Mm-hmm.
So
We,
anyway,
Yeah.
we actually got a few more Oathmark questions. I'm just gonna
okay.
for a minute. Do you know if there's any planned models for all the weird mythological creatures that you put in Oathmark? There's a lot of monsters that we don't
There
often
are
see.
there there are plans. Some of those plans got stomped all over by COVID, um, which isn't to say they're not going to happen. It just means that that's why you haven't seen some of them already. Um, Again, like, North Star is not a huge operation, uh, despite what they actually accomplish and the amount they managed to produce. So any little shutdown and stuff can have a huge knock-on effect that just means that they're just not capable of, turning around things in that amount of time, because, they've only got a couple of casters and I don't know how many actual casting machines, but not a huge number. And so so there are still plans afoot, and like I said, I don't get too involved in that, but I know they are ongoing. But it's hard too, because they want to do the Oathmark things, but here's Frostgrave too, and they want to do Oathmark things, but here's Stargrave, and it's just only so many hours in the day.
Yeah, gotcha. Oh, sorry, Tom, did you have more Oathmark questions?
No, no,
Oh,
not quite now.
well, I think in just a second, then I'm gonna stop the recording. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for spending a couple of hours with us.
yeah, it's been great.
We covered a lot of different games, got some breaking news and insights. That's awesome. I had a great time, and I'm really really
Yeah, it's
happy
been fun.
that you wanted to join us here.
Well, I
That's
mean,
awesome.
it's you guys essentially support my life, so I'm really grateful for that. So I couldn't do it without you guys.
Well, it's nice. Discord is becoming one of my favorite social media platforms here. After this COVID things, it offers something different than Facebook, and we're having some good hobby talks, and it was a
Mm-hmm.
pleasure having you here. So thanks a lot for it.
Oh, thank you very much. Yep. Well, thank you. I'm going to sign off now because I think my wife's wondering where I am, but it's been good talking to you guys.
Have a nice
Thank you.
evening.
You too.